Good afternoon. I'm Dixie and I'm a volunteer with the BC Bereavement Helpline. I'm excited to introduce our speaker for today's event, Jessica Wolf Ortiz. Jessica is a registered clinical counselor with the BC Clinical Counseling Association and has a master's degree in family therapy. Suicide bereaved herself, Jessica has devoted part of her 20 years clinical work to grief therapy and uniquely suicide bereavement. Jessica is a TED Talk speaker and the author of the book, Overcoming Suicide Bereavement, The Experience of Those That Stay, about the aftermath of suicide and the unique aspects of suicide bereavement. This book, currently available in Spanish, is in the process of being translated into English. In this presentation, Jessica speaks to the specific challenges of a suicide loss and the experience of suicide survivors. We are honored to have her speak today on suicide bereavement. Thank you, Jessica, for presenting One Event Does Not Define a Life, Coping with Suicide Loss.
Hi everyone, welcome to this video on suicide grief. Maybe you're watching this video because you or someone you know may have lost a significant other to suicide. First, know that whatever you're going through is normal. Pain might be overwhelming, and yes, suicide is a terrible loss accompanied by a difficult and painful grieving process. We hope that this video serves as light and brings hope and insight to your process. Let's stop and think about this next statement for a moment. One event does not define a life. Suicide is an event that impacts many, many lives and many, many people. And many, many times, this event overshadows the life of our loved ones. A tragic event that for some time might make accessing the memories, the stories, and the anecdotes almost impossible. But this is more than an event. There is more life before and also after. Who are survivors of suicide? It might sound confusing, and it could lead us to think that survivors of suicide are those who have attempted suicide and survived. Yes, them too are survivors of suicide. But we consider survivors of suicide those who have been affected by a suicide. Suicide is like a massive bomb. It impacts and strikes many people. It rocks their world, and making it quite a difficult process. Suicide is a sudden, traumatic loss. We will talk about it a little later on. What is postvention? Postvention is the work that is done to help the families and friends cope with that suicide loss. Let's ask ourselves what the particularities of a suicide bereavement is. First, let's consider that suicide is a sudden death. Yes, some signs might have been there, but it is always unexpected. Maybe we knew our person was struggling. Maybe they might have even mentioned hopelessness and suicidal ideation. Still, we're never fully prepared for the moment when it happens. Second, it is always a violent death, no matter the method. Also, guilt is an important ingredient in suicide aftermath. It's sometimes very difficult for suicide survivors to accommodate the guilt. And let's just make a very quick stop to mention that no one is responsible for another's decisions, even when this involves death. Suicide survivors have a difficult time ruminating about the question, why? Suicide survivors can't many times think about this, and they find themselves digging in the past for answers. Then they might go over their loved ones' computers and phones and asking other people over and over to retell them their last encounters with their loved ones. And this is a very painful process when they realize that there are and will be missing pieces for this puzzle. And that even though they might have many pieces already there, the full picture will not be completed because the person with the answer is no longer there. Suicide loss takes a huge emotional toll on the survivors, who are left to digest this emotional experience, which is always tragic. Society and social beliefs also make suicide loss difficult to process by adding stigma and taboo to the mixture. The lack of information, the fear of contagion, the incapacity to address this difficult topic leave survivors of suicide feeling isolated and misunderstood. In conclusion, suicide loss can be, and most time is, a traumatic experience. What are some challenges suicide survivors encounter while they're grieving? First, finding the right support in their communities might be difficult. Sometimes they are referred to counselors, which, with the best intentions, don't have the expertise to treat a traumatic loss, less to understand the particularities of this experience that we have just recently mentioned, what that are regarding to suicide loss. Suicide survivors often mention how difficult it is to talk to others about their loss. Communication is an aspect that constantly becomes complicated. Suicide survivors mention how difficult it is to talk to others about their loss. Communication might be difficult. For some people, it might be overwhelming to talk about suicide. And for others, with the best intentions, they try to avoid the whole topic overall. Finding the right support in their usual support system might be challenging. It has been wrongly suggested that to heal and overcome grief, one must let go or accept or be willing to move on. Be careful. This puts extra pressure on those who are experiencing such a terrible loss, as if their efforts to heal were never enough. And suicide survivors have a difficulty accommodating to this experience. They need to integrate the experience, but they never move on or let go. Often, with a lack of deeper understanding, the trauma that accompanies suicide loss is overseen. And this is a huge mistake. Trauma is not a choice. It is a reaction that holds both an emotional and physical memory that needs to be addressed. Some survivors of suicide experience suicidal ideation for different reasons. First, due to the intensity of the emotional pain. Second, as a means to understand what their person went through. It happens, it's not right, it's not wrong, it just happens, but it needs to be addressed and worked through. Let's consider a few steps to have in mind to be able to process a suicide loss. Perlman suggests that the first step is to find resources and support, both inner resources and external resources. External resources come in a form of handouts, information, books, organizations, also family, counselors, etc. Inner resources refer to being able to be proactive even when accompanied by the immense pain of the loss. Second, it is knowing that the need to identify the trauma in the experience. By recognizing the trauma, it is imperative to find the right help and tools to process it. And finally, taking time to do the mourning process by joining a support group, for example. This is important. Or just by taking time to grieve. Time to heal the emotional wound of the loss. Part of the healing process involves a couple of things. First, I would say being honest. and dealing with the truth is one. What is my truth? How can I create a narrative that allows me to incorporate this experience to my life, that I'm able to be honest and open about? Second, as we previously already mentioned, remind yourself that you are not responsible for others' choices. We might have made a mistake, but who doesn't? And that does not make you responsible for others' decisions. Overcoming guilt is a big step in the process. Emotionally, you may feel many different things at the same time, for strange as this may sound. Anger and sadness, relief and impotence. Just beware, you are not crazy. You are grieving. Within the family, everyone might be grieving at the same time. Still, each and every one of you is experiencing a unique process. Grief is a personal journey. And the real challenge is to keep the family reunited or continues in continuous unity, even while grieving. It is challenging. Finally, it is a way to overcome the experience that involves giving meaning and finding a purpose for what has happened to us. Another few ideas around the bereavement of suicide is that we need to consider that grief alters our capacity to full function for some time. So therefore, we need to be patient with ourselves. Your mind may start to wander, so you need to work on keeping grounded. It might wander to the past or even to the future. Trying to be present in the here and now might help you feel less anxious. Ways to ground yourself is to go outside and connect with nature. When we go outside, we really go physically outside of ourselves, of our minds, of our rumination. And connecting with nature is very healing. We know for a fact that nature holds an amazing healing power. So by looking at a tree, at the birds, at the ocean, feeling the wind, having all of our senses awakened and connected to nature, we are able to walk away from that rumination. I've found interesting when I've been doing my research that there has been found that tears that are cried due to emotional pain have a different chemistry. So by crying because of emotional pain, we're really doing a detoxifying and self-regulating process. This is, for me, it's been always amazing. People commonly say that time heals all wounds, but it is important to remember that we need to be proactive in this time. So it's not only time, but us being proactive in it. Finally, it is important to find others that have been through the same experiences as us. In the case of suicide loss, this is fundamental. Having said that we don't let go or that we move on, we can and should incorporate our loved one to our lives. The person or our loved one left us physically, but we can maintain an emotional relationship to them. We knew their thoughts, their answers, and their emotions. So let's think about asking ourselves these next couple of questions. What did your loved one see when they looked at you through their loving eyes? How did they know these things about you? If they could be with you today, what would they say about you, about your efforts, about the efforts that you were making in your life? What words of encouragement would they offer? What difference would it make to your relationship with others if you carried this knowledge with you in your daily life. We call this restorative retelling, or in the words of Michael White and in the narrative approach, is saying hello again. And lastly, I want to leave you with this thought by Martin Luther King Jr., which I found very profound, and it goes like this. As my suffering mounted, I soon realized that there were two ways in which I could respond to my situation, either to react with bitterness or seek to transform the suffering into a creative force. I decided to follow the latter course. We don't always have a choice in what happens to us, but we always have a choice in what we do with that. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this live presentation of this video, which intends to be another resource for you in your path and process in healing. And I'm happy to be here to answer a few questions that I've already received from you. The first question is somebody's asking is how to talk to young children about this, and do you tell them if it was a suicide, and how do you explain? As it is mentioned in the video, I believe in that it's important to be honest and to be open about what the situation we're in. Of course, it will depend on the age of the child we have in front of us. I remember something that might be useful is this anecdote. I remember a woman telling me that she had told her 8-year-old son that his dad had passed away because of a heart trouble. And to me, that made sense because it can become more elaborate. It was a heart trouble. His dad was having problems facing life and facing emotional pain. So that is a way to answer that might be helpful, and it can be built from there. The important thing is that it needs not to be a lie, because at the end, if we lie, we're going. The result is going to be that our child, as he grows up and finds out, is going to be resentful and angry. So, as much of a truth that we can give them, suicide is a human experience. It can happen to anybody. It doesn't have to do necessarily with a mental illness. It can happen to anybody, and it just says that our person was struggling. So that's probably what I would say to a young child. The second question is, it says, I never saw any signs. How can that be? And I should have seen something. Usually there are signs, but we don't see them, and we see them in retrospect. That is part of what we've known interviewing people that have experienced suicide loss. Signs might be there, but they are subtle, and they are not. We are not as human prepared to see them. We have difficulty seeing people's pain, even if they mention it, and we have a difficulty connecting to people's pain. It doesn't necessarily have to do with mental illness. That there doesn't have to need to be a mental diagnosis. People just might be struggling, and it's normal that we oversee the signs. And if for some reason you still knowing the signs after or afterwards still don't see that, or it doesn't relate to your loved one, it's okay. It happens too. A third question, it says, my family doesn't tell people my brother died by suicide. I don't want to lie about it. What do I do? That's a difficult question, because on one side we're saying be open about it, and it's okay to talk about it, and it's important that you name it as suicide for you to be able to get all the help you need, and for be able to normalize your experience, and for people to know that what you're experiencing is just not any grief, it's a traumatic loss. But still, you might want to be respectful of your family's wishes. So the way I would probably approach it would be to say, something terrible happened in our family. We're all struggling, and I need to be respectful for my family. But it's important for me that you know that we are struggling, and that we need you to respect this space or this time for us in our coping in our coping process. So on one side, I would probably be very respectful of my family, but also give me the chance to say that we're hurting and that this is a struggle. Fourth question says, what are some tips I have to what tips can I give them for when they go back to work, and how do I explain about my daughter's suicide? I think it's important to contact your employer or your supervisor and let them know what happened on a one-on-one basis, and let them know what you expect people or what your needs are. Some people might just want to say, I need to go back to work and I don't want this to be addressed. Other might want to say, I need a hug, or I need people to come close and give me some type of words or sharings, and it's okay. So it's important first to know what you need, to figure out what you need, then to communicate that to your workspace, and prepare them for that. So the once you engage back into work, it doesn't come as a surprise for any of the parties, especially for you, and you feel more comfortable. Maybe you might say that you don't want people asking. Maybe you want people to ask what happened. Maybe you want people to have an open conversation about it. And I think it's important that we educate those around us in terms of what we need and what we're hoping for them to, where we hope them to be in our grieving process. People don't know, and sometimes even with the best intentions, the best outcomes don't happen. So we need to let people know what we need in order for us to go back to work, for us to continue our grieving process, and for them to be able to support us. Communication and how we approach our environment are important topics in suicide loss. People struggle with that. What I've seen happen is that people, when approach, don't get sometimes the best comments, and that is painful, and that's considered a secondary loss, and re-traumatization and re-victimization. So it's important to let people know and be open about it, even though we don't say fully, that we don't share the full story of the details of what happened. We can just say, I'm struggling, I'm grieving, it's been painful, it's been traumatic, but I need you to support me in this way. I need you to hug, to stay away, to keep close, to invite, to not invite, whatever we need. The most important thing is that we need to be respectful of our own grieving process, and give ourselves time to do the work. Let me just check one moment here if there are any other answers we might have. Another question I have here is, what do I do if I see my loved one angry? My other son is struggling with his anger. I have found out that anger and sadness are two sides of the same coin. So some people might express anger when in reality, deep down, they're more sad and they're hurt. So if you approach your loved one or your son or whomever is angry and say, I see your anger, but I also see your pain, maybe you're able to connect and you're able to heal together. Family grieving as a family is a struggle. It's difficult because, as I mentioned in the video, we all have unique processes and we're all experiencing it differently. We're experiencing it differently because we had a different relationship with our loved one. We're experiencing differently because we're different human beings and we are different people. So it's important to respect others' processes, but also respect our own. And just know that if we're grieving, we're all in pain. And if we're only in pain, it's because we love someone dear and someone we loved. the most important thing is that we acknowledge the love, the sharing, even though we express it differently. You're not alone in your grieving process. There are for sure other people grieving just as you. And at least in my world, there's a big community of suicide survivors that are there to help you, to walk with you. So don't fear asking for help, and don't fear looking out there for others who are grieving just as you. And I want to use this opportunity to invite all of you to join us this Saturday, November 20th, for our event, International Suicide Loss Day. We're having a gathering. It's going to be online, and you can look up the information at the Crisis Center website and join us. We have this free event for all of you to join. I don't know if there are any more questions, and if not, we'll be closing this broadcast.